Well, good afternoon, everybody, and apologies at the front end. For what is a very good week for Democrats in Virginia. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. Before I get to your questions, let me go through 3 or 4 quick topics at the top. Obviously, the first were the remarkable wins by Abigail Spanberger and all the way down the ticket, the pickup of 13 seats in the State House. This was clearly a rejection of Donald Trump. It was her focus on affordability. And I think the current Republican administration in Richmond and all the Republican candidates tied themselves so closely to Trump that there was no way they could avoid the voters' wrath. One of the things that's pretty interesting is somebody who's been doing this for a while, people will say, well, that was, Democrats won or Spanberger won because of Northern Virginia. You actually could take Northern Virginia out of the difference, and Democrats still won the governorship. And that is, I think, a remarkable achievement. I was particularly happy as somebody who, my mantra for my 20-plus years in this has been, you got to let folks in rural communities have the same hope as folks in more urban communities. And the gains that Democrats made and Spanberger made in jurisdiction after jurisdiction, in Southside and Southwest, the fact that the Democrats now have a delegate west of Roanoke, I think her message in focusing on basics and not going to the extremes and focusing on affordability really resonates. And it is something that is so terribly important. And that brings me to the next topic, which, of course, is the shutdown. And, the truth of the matter is Donald Trump told the truth yesterday, not something he often does, when he acknowledged that the shutdown hurt Republicans. This is a Republican shutdown. They control the presidency, the Senate, the House. And the remarkable thing is we've been saying, let's get the government open. And I know people are hurting. I heard that as I met with voters all across the weekend. But they also are terrified by the affordability cliff that's coming with health care. As people see the new rates, they're terrified if they're 1 out of 8 Virginians who get food assistance and the downright cruelty of this administration. They could have put a full plan in place, but instead they are hedging and hesitating and how much they're going to reimburse, which just adds more nervousness to Virginians. The fact that Trump's kind of chaotic tariff policies were even questioned by the very conservative Supreme Court. Because remember, though, Donald Trump tariffs are taxes, as the Supreme Court said. They are adding $2,400 a year in additional cost to an average American family. So I do hope my Republican friends got the message. Americans, Virginians want us focused on affordability. That means avoiding the health care cliff. It means getting people the food assistance. It means having a predictable economic policy that doesn't raise taxes through tariffs. It also means getting the government open. And we're waiting to hear from Leader Thune what his intentions are. Remember, they control the schedule and what we vote on, when we vote on. I know there's discussions back and forth, but one of the things that's also problematic is there's such lack of trust whether, even if you get the government, and when we get the government reopened, which I hope will be shortly, how do you make sure this administration adheres to a deal? That's why later today I'm leading a bill with a number of my Democratic colleagues, including all of the senators from Maryland and Virginia, to say it would be illegal for any president, to RIF people or fire people during a shutdown. Since early October, the administration has sent out about 4,000 RIF notices, reduction in force notices. Thank goodness the courts have hold that and stymied that. But we know that Russell Vought, the director of OMB's, key policy is to terrorize and traumatize the federal workforce by trying to do illegal RIFs during this shutdown. It's just wrong. My legislation that I'm introducing today would prohibit that. on a going forward basis. A lot of Republicans have said, we don't think people ought to be riffed during shutdowns. We'll see if they're willing to put their name on that kind of legislation. One last issue that something I've been working on a long time that I'm also introduced this week with Josh Hawley, so broadly bipartisan, that looks at the coming AI revolution. I mean, AI can bring benefits to communities, but there is also a dark underbelly to this kind of technology, as we've seen with so many technological innovations. We're already seeing Amazon, for example, lay off 14,000 people, Microsoft 8,000. Other large entities have indicated that AI could reduce half of their workforce. We don't collect any data on that at this point. So my bill with Josh Hawley would say companies need to report to the BLS when it gets reopened and the Labor Department, what kind of jobs are being lost by AI. And just quickly, what we are also including on this, and this is where I think AI will have the most disruption in the short term, is the fact that particularly those elimination of those starter jobs coming out of college. Most of the large banks and accounting firms and consulting firms have all told me they are literally cutting their internships and first-year hires in half. We already have 9% unemployment of recent college graduates. I think that number could go to 25% literally within the next year or so. And how we look at that job dislocation, particularly for families who've stretched their finances to send their kid to college, if there are no jobs coming out of college, could have huge economic disruption. So we're trying to measure that as well. And one of the things I'll have more to say about is I think we really need to challenge the AI community and the AI tech companies that they need to chip in and help develop how we retrain folks for these AI-related jobs. I may accept the fact that over a long period of time, AI will create a whole host of new jobs, but there's no one, the most ardent AI advocate, hasn't acknowledged there could be 5 to 7 years of dislocation. And if we're suddenly looking at 25, 30, 35% of college graduates not being able to get a job, coming out with a great deal of student debt, the economic chaos that we've already got will be hugely accelerated. So I'm sure I won't get any questions on that, but I wanted to talk about that issue because trust me, within the next year or so, AI job dislocation is going to be one of the premier issues in our country. So with that, why don't I turn it over to Val or Catherine, and we'll take your questions.
Senator, the first question is from Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks, as always, for joining us this afternoon. Related to the shutdown, House Speaker Mike Johnson today, when asked whether he would give a vote on ACA subsidies, said he could not guarantee that. What would be your best-case scenario about how things could move forward over the next several days in connection with what Democrats would like?
Right. Well, again, Speaker Johnson has been the height of irresponsibility now giving, 7 weeks of paid vacation to House members. They're not here in town. It is insulting to our federal workers. The fact that President Trump went around, took 2 international trips is insulting to the federal workers. In terms of the discussion between the bipartisan gang, I am not part of that gang. Michael, this is the first one I've not been, or Mitchell, I've not been part of, because I just don't know whether our Republican senators will ever stand up to Trump. Now, after Tuesday, maybe they will, but they are talking about a continuing resolution that would involve getting the government open and getting a vote on health care and also moving some of the appropriations bills so that there's not an ability for this administration to arbitrarily cut back on, say, SNAP benefits or WIC benefits. And I'll frankly get a report on that when the Democratic caucus meets at 1 o'clock. But the fact that the Speaker has kept the House out of session, I wish I could take him around to folks in Northern Virginia and some of the voters and let him explain to people who've gone without a paycheck for 6 or 7 weeks and are now dipping into their savings or remortgaging their home why he ought to get on a paid vacation, because Congress is getting paid. I'm not taking my salary. I'm dedicating it, donating it all to the Federal Employee Relief Fund. But it is the height of irresponsibility.
Senator, the next question is from Jory Heckman with Federal News Network.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for doing today's call. Question about the bill you're leading with Senator Hawley on AI and the impact it's going to have on a number of different sectors, including the federal workforce. How vulnerable do you feel the federal workforce is to job displacement through AI? I believe we've heard a number of agency heads speak about that already.
Yeah, listen, AI is going to transform our workplace in dramatic ways. And, you know, I'm not fully convinced that all these jobs eliminated are going to be replaced by AI-related jobs. So I'm concerned about that. But even if I say that they may be replaced by AI-enhanced jobs, and we're seeing some of the middle management actually being enhanced by AI, but you don't need those entry-level jobs, I am terribly afraid, for our federal workers. Now, at the end of the day, I would remind folks, and for people who say, well, we've got way too many federal workers, we have the same size of our federal workforce today that we had basically in 1960. And our population is, 80 million more people? So if there are ways to bring about greater efficiency through technology, count me in. Frankly, I've always said a smart, fact-based DOGE would have made sense. But I'm worried that when you layer on this anti-federal worker mindset from this administration, when you look at the chaos that's happened over the last 10 weeks, when you then have the challenges that AI will present, are we going to get the kind of world-class workers we've got as federal workers today joining the federal workforce tomorrow, next week, next year, and the next few years? And that is a huge concern to me. That's why I'm trying to at least make sure we get the data, because we don't have job elimination, but what I'm as concerned about is, frankly, the hiring of those entry-level jobs, and we're trying to start to track that as well.
Senator, the next question is from Michael Martz with the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Yes, Senator, good afternoon. You mentioned the election results on Tuesday night and what effect they might have on the debate over reopening the government, ending the shutdown, and addressing health care. What are your thoughts on that? What evidence are you seeing of movement as a result of the elections?
Well, listen, I know firsthand we got to get the government reopened. I also know, Michael, as you saw when we were talking to those Virginians that you and other members of the press listened into, that are absolutely, facing, Sophie's choices of whether I continue my health care or, when you've got two people with chronic illnesses, or one of you continue health care and the other may be left to the challenges. And you add on top of that, frankly, the healthcare cliff was one thing, but the just plain cruelty of how the administration has played around with these SNAP benefits, the food assistance benefits. Literally 1 out of 8 Americans get food assistance. I mean, that's crazy in the richest country in the world, but if that level of uncertainty as well, and the administration has done nothing, basically. The courts forced them, but done nothing to try to ease that pain and tension. And again, I've not been involved in some of these bipartisan conversations, but I know there's a sense of urgency from both sides. But there's also enormous lack of trust when you've got, the president reneging, doing rescissions, and candidly the speaker AWOL.
Senator, the next question is from Brendan King with CBS 6.
Senator Warner, thank you so much for your time. The FAA is directing airlines to reduce flight schedules. They say to continue safe airspace operations tomorrow. Airports here in Virginia will be impacted, especially in the D.C. area. So we know the Republicans blame Senate Democrats for the shutdown, pushing it to pass the CR bill. So your reaction to the FAA's move here, and for you, Senator, what is the tipping point?
My reaction is we've got to keep our air traffic safe. I know there are FAA and air traffic controllers that are on second and third shifts without a paycheck. But in terms of the causation of this, don't take my word for it. Listen to Donald Trump. He said, the American public blames the Republicans for this shutdown. And the fact that the President of the United States has spent, since the shutdown started, not a single meeting with anybody other than his own political team, that's insane. And it is not rocket science to say we can avoid the cliff on health care, get the food benefits back, and get the government opened. And I hope, I think the American people, not just in Virginia, but in New Jersey, New York, California, Georgia. There was a statewide election in Georgia, Democrats won, that they hadn't won in 30 years. Donald Trump, get the message. Sit down with us. Let's work this out. It could be worked out in a couple of hours, and get the government open, get folks back their health care, and don't allow folks in Virginia to go hungry. Because, as you also may know, our food banks are already so overstressed that when people can't use their food stamps and they're going hungry, their only last resort is the food banks, and they're going to get crushed.
Senator, the next question is from Raquel Martin with Nexstar. Raquel, are you there? Okay, we're going to move on to Kate Neutschland with NBC 29.
Hi, Senator. Actually, my question has already been answered, so thank you so much. I'll pass it off to someone else.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. We'll pass it off to Brittany with ABC 13.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much. Wanted to ask you a question about redistricting. Democrats are really pushing this here in Virginia. Even though this was just done a few years ago, wanted to ask, should this be something that should be allowed to happen every 10 years after a census, to avoid both Republicans and Democrats going back and forth between, one or another?
Listen, the Constitution is clear. You're supposed to do redistricting every 10 years. Remember who started this. It wasn't started by Democrats. It was started by Donald Trump and a bunch of folks in Texas to say, let's try to cook the books. They know the American people are turning against his policies, and they're trying to, frankly, cheat the system by redistricting. And then you saw in California where overwhelmingly, I think it was a 27-point margin, voters said, no, we don't want this cooking the books on redistricting. I think what Virginia Democrats did, and I want to give a big shout out again to both the Leader Surville in the Senate and Speaker Scott, they're saying Virginians ought to have a chance to weigh in on this if this is happening all around. Remember, in North Carolina, they did this without any voter approval. In Virginia, if the legislature moves forward, Virginians will have a chance to weigh in on whether they want this to happen or not. But let's not pretend that this was somehow popped into the political debate out of thin air. This popped into the political debate because Donald Trump knew his policies were sticking it to Americans, and they're trying to cook the books for the 26th election. If Texas and these other states would back off, I think there'd be no support in Virginia for redistricting. They've already taken that first step, and we'll see how it plays through the legislature and with the new governor. But again, I just remind people, in Virginia, voters will have a chance and have a say on whether they want this to happen or not.
Senator, we'll try going one more time. So Raquel Martin with Nexstar.
Hi, Senator. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Just wanted to follow up on this bill that you've introduced with Senator Hawley. Do you see this legislation as a first step towards addressing this looming jobs displacement crisis? And have you received any assurances from leadership that this could potentially make it to the floor for a vote?
Well, we just introduced it this week, and there's a few other things going on. And Josh Hawley's been a good partner on this. We got to get the data first. I have had a number of conversations with the largest leaders of the AI firms in our country. And, usually they are very disdainful of government. And I got to tell you, if we have this massive job dislocation, particularly for entry-level jobs, when we saw dislocation, think about what happened with textile workers and furniture workers in Southside Virginia in the early 90s. The way we responded was with something called Trade Assistance Act grants. It didn't really work that well. So my challenge to the AI bros is, hey, this job dislocation is coming. You guys got to help us design this and help pay for it. And we could have it unwind after 5 years or so if they're right and new AI jobs are created. But think about, I've got lots of friends who've got, their kids getting out of college at this point. They're coming out with a lot of debt, and they're looking at 9% current unemployment, coming out of college after they've done everything right, studied hard, got a degree. And I fear, with the projections I've seen, that that 9% unemployment could go to 25 or 30%. Not only putting huge stress on these young people coming out of school, but also their families who've probably gone into hock to get them through college. So we got to focus on that, as well as the kind of transformation that's taking place with the established workforce. Remember, I think it was Walmart that said at one point they could see half of their jobs eliminated. We don't get our hands around this, the economic despair and lack of hopefulness that we see with so many families, that could accelerate tenfold. So let's get the data first. Let's sit down with the tech community. This is nothing to do Democrat or Republican. Let's look at the upsides on AI, but let's also look at some of the potential downside. And that's just one last comment on this. It goes back a little bit to and our record so far on this stuff stinks. Let me acknowledge that. Back in 2014, 2015, 2016, when I started raising concerns about social media, and we didn't do anything. And I think we got a generation of young people whose mental health has paid the price for our lack of putting some guardrails in place. That social media didn't have massive disruption in the job market. AI will. And so let's try to get ahead of it. We're seeing, and this is going to accelerate at such a fast speed. If every bank or services firm suddenly says, okay, we don't need those first-year hires, and we're going to cut our hiring class in half, how are folks going to get the experience they need to kind of make it in this AI-driven economy? I think it is imperative, and I will, on this one, I'd even put a wager that this will be the defining issue in 28, and it'll be a major, major issue in 26.
Senator, those are all the questions we have for today.
All right, everybody. Thanks.